Hello and most welcome to 851. I will continue to speak a little bit about Douglas Hofstadter's famous book, The Brick, also known as Gödel, Escher, Bach, and it searches out trying to explain what is self-reference. Remember the hands of Escher. They are painting themselves. One hand is painting the other one simultaneously, and I think it's the best picture of the problem of self-reference. Self-reference is something that all thinkers and all people have been fighting with, and it seems to be impossible in some way. And often Escher's paintings and drawings are described as being of otherworldly nature, non-functional, not real, but do remember they are as real as it gets. It cannot be any more real, because there are actual depictions of a reality that we usually deny, and that is the reality of self-reference. This is very similar to the problem of Gödel. Gödel was assigned by Hilbert in the Paris Conference of 1900 to solve the problem with the consistency and the coherency of mathematics. He did not manage to do that. He did the absolute opposite. He proved once and for all that it is impossible to have both coherency and consistency in a formal system like mathematics, and for that matter any other system. Doesn't matter what system it is. We can never create a system that is both coherent and consistent at the very same time. This is one of those things that has never ever come to a general knowledge. That's great sadness, because that means that this incredibly important information has not come to fruition, to good use, because it is incredibly important. I would say when I studied myself and all the people I've seen on the internet discussing different things, they all believe in the idea that the formal system can be both consistent and coherent. And that also means that thereby they can preserve the idea of that the formal system can exist, and that means that they will, within themselves as well as in general debate, in thinking, in literature, in discussions, like all philosophers, I would say, like John Searle, Orman Quine, even Richard Rorty, maybe not Thomas Nagel, but most definitely Richard Dawkins. Hitchens definitely wasn't a believer in that formal system was both C and C. Gödel did prove that. So one could say that Gödel is the first deconstructor ground force. And I know that his influence was massive all over the world, although the general knowledge of what he proved has not come up to the fore, which is a sadness. It's a great sadness. Gödel himself would have deserved all the praise, and especially the realization of the incredible importance of his theorem. This is very important. It's an interesting book how actually Einstein met Gödel, or at least from the start not really knowing who this fellow was, and I think that could have helped Einstein in his struggle to understand quantum mechanics and accepting it quite a lot. And it's helpful also for us normal mortal people who are not having the laureate of genius like Einstein and Gödel. We can also have good use for this, and this is the main message of the book by Douglas Hofstadter, Gödel Escher Back. The message is we cannot have a self-identity, we cannot have a reflective self as long as we keep to the idea, or even I would say image, of formal systems capabilities. All of politics today has this grandeur illusion of being able to effectively decide what is true and thereby evicting what is false, establishing a core, and all other things do not either count or even do not exist. And this is the construction of a formal system. What the book actually shows is that both things can simultaneously hold, and that goes for all different sorts of formal systems, no matter what they are. Goes for a book. Contradictions are quite right to have in a book. They're actually even necessary for us to have an understanding. Nothing moves without contradiction, and the text becomes stillborn without the enduring force. One could also call that the contradictory power of the opposites. Remember what I mentioned in a previous lecture about the yin and yang symbol. Contradictions are an absolute necessity to have some sort of energy, a force, a movement. Without these contradictions doing their job, we cannot have prana, ki, force, direction. We become as stillborn as a text that doesn't have live, non-diffused oppositions that make it lively. And when they all end up in being only polarities, nullifying themselves, the text dies. It doesn't have any power to show anything. It becomes short-circuited. That is, it is lacking all telling power. Its force is gone. Contradiction is not something to cast out. This is something that lies at the very core of what it is to be alive, to have a consciousness, and also to have a direction. And this is more showed in the book when you come into the Escher section. Escher's drawings are actually quite helpful when it comes to showing that it is possible to have self-reflection and both have it is quite possible to have self-reflection as at the very same time as you can have an object. You can have thoughts, and at the very same time as you are thinking, you can reflect upon your thoughts, something that seems to be impossible in a formal system, and even a threat to the formal system. So as you see here, the information in the book Good Leisure Back is for the credibility of deconstruction quite important, and I would say it's also a helping tool for a lot of those people who are in a mathematical or a logical way stuck to the idea of the formal system's deciding power. And it gets easier to understand also why there is such a need for, what could I call it, stricture, closedness, determination, lack of flexibility, when the idea of the formal systems is established within an organization or like the educational system, but also within the individual. The idea that opposing pairs cannot exist simultaneously, that the cat can be both dead or alive at the very same time, and so forth. That is a very limiting idea, and in this very limitation comes a lack of energy, and that's also the reason for we are not seeing dimensions anymore. I think I mentioned earlier on that no one today can perceive a painting to have depth anymore. It's a complete flat surface, lifeless, non-telling, non-communicating, non-vibrating, and all those things, all the things that we know exist in reality, but they do not fit the formal system. So the flatness is coming to the fore, and also the flatness of our own bodily system. We are three-dimensional creatures, and by believing in the formal system and the idea that contradiction cannot exist at the same time is a killer for the body system. That's the main reason why we are unbalanced today. It's not enough to say that we can balance us up and still have the formal system. That does not work. The relaxation comes from when we understand that the formal system can never be working, at least not in the way that is normally perceived. And then the body will be unbalanced. You will not have this lovely, as I saw this morning when I was waiting for the bus I'm at now, this young scared. It was very early adolescence, moving about, talking to her friends, cuddling a dog, and it was just perfect. She was completely aware of her surroundings, but at the very same time able to focus in on the dog, on her fellow schoolmates, I imagine they were, and there was no exclusion there. I looked a little bit further, was some older fellows, and they were closed off. You could see every time they began to talk, what was around them disappeared all of a sudden, and it was a definite change in posture, attention. It became cruder, less lenient, and this is something I started to feel now. I discovered within myself that these thoughts that are typical for this closed off state, these thoughts are very heavy. They're almost 3 to 4 times heavier than the more light thinking. When everything is working, when you have a flow, it feels like the thoughts are so light, they're so tender, and they go wherever they want, and you follow their lead, and then you lead them, and it is a chase, it is also an investigation. It's a movement, lively, clear, engaging movement that is lost when this fixation starting to making its force heard. It is the clunky of the machinery. I often think of it as the spinning jenny, the first thread making machine of pre-industrial England, when industrialization firstly took hold. It's mechanical, it is putting polarities into place, dissolving them, and making for a lack of energy. This clonkety-clonk heavy thoughts I'm thinking of, and they go well with the excluding attention, this cruder, non-allowing attention. That non-allowing attention is the upholding of the formal systems, the idea of the formal system, the gestalt of the formal system. The formal system is so easily challenged. It's not something that is incredibly hard to overthrow at any moment, but still it holds its grip, and by clinging on to it we become weaker and weaker. And I was thinking, well, that's very evident in politics. The former president of the US, what he was saying was often checked against the formal system. If it made any sense, if it was logical, they often say that it wasn't logical, it was not rational. And I was thinking, if you want to do something, you cannot be rational, because rationality, if it's only rationality, leads to everything stops. And this is the clinkety-clonk of the spinning jenny, taken a step further until it finally terminates and doesn't even move anymore. This is when the distinctions between plus and minus, right and wrong, false and true, has been made so strong that nothing can move anymore, becomes unmovable, and you strain yourself. This is this strain you feel in the body. Tension coming over the back, going to the front of your thighs, all the way down to your toes. That area becomes tense. This becomes the area you try to hold the whole of reality with. You try to uphold the formal system. And at the same time you want to have relaxation, and you make back, well, you start by making the bottom of your feet, the soles of your feet tensed, flaccid, it's lax, flaccid and lax. The back of your legs become flaccid, flappy, unable to hold your weight, and then that flaccidness goes over to the belly area, goes all the way up to your neck, goes up this way up to the ears, and in this way goes over the eyes, and all the way on the side here to the nostril, coming down again here. This is how it looks like. This is the upholding of the formal system, an impossibility. And I think that is important to realize. It is most definitely an impossibility. It's not possible. So you can see what a strain that put on the both mental system, spiritual system, and on the body system itself. It is taking away energy, it is draining the system, and you get frustrated. It's a little bit like hitting your head to the wall, and you see more and more there can be no action, spontaneity coming from this. Because what it is a complete lockdown of everything that moves. There can no longer be any movement in this system. And this is when you come to the stage of monosemism. Every word needs to be fixated to one singular meaning. It cannot have several different meanings. It cannot have contradictory meanings, something I discussed the other day. There is a pronoun in Japanese called omae. It means in front of, more or less. It's very similar in some ways to the anti or andi, as to say today, in front of. One of those things that makes the idea of exclusion clearer. But this omae in the Japanese language means both me, you, us, neither, and it's not fixed. That's the beauty of it. And I remember when I was studying linguistics, the professor said, and in complete agreement to the whole class, that the meaning of this specific word, this pronoun, can always at every instant be fixed once you know the context. So you see, I think that's very telling. The idea that context, what it is situated in, can absolutely in every instance decide what it means, and then you get the singular meaning. And this is a way of escaping from the idea that the word have many meanings, because it's horrifying to people that it is constructed that way. It should only be one meaning, and that is the tension. This is the very, very clear and obvious tension of the system. It's also the flaccidity that makes it impossible to have a clear difference between the two areas, because we perceive them to be opposing, and opposing things should not exist in the bodily system. and unconsciously, or even consciously, I would say, maybe in the youth, we try to nullify them. That is, when plus go to minus, minus goes to plus, what you are left with is nothing. This is what we're trying to do. We are doing something I will get back to in later lecture. We are doing the Parmenidean ascent or descent, could be a better word. We strive so much to the idea of sufficient reason for our thoughts, our actions, our words, that we lock the whole system in a deadlock. It cannot move anymore because the strong belief in the fixation should solve everything is taking away the energy completely. And this is of course why prana is an impossibility in Western culture, Western thinking, because it defies the Parmenidean idea in itself, the imagery of a complete firmness, an unmovable world where everything is just existence and there is no opposing pairs whatsoever. Well, let's get back to the tensions. You see my ear here? It's getting redder and redder. And I think that is similar to the tension that is built up by this thing for the mouth, and how it sort of creates unnecessary flaccidness, but also unnecessary tension. And what happens in this situation, we want to get rid of the tension because that is often what we feel to be the bothering thing. That is the pain, that is the ache, usually situated in the dorsal area. But the whole reason for these unnecessary tensions is that there is not enough tensions in other parts. And so you get a sort of a lockdown. You only want to have what you think is the good thing. You made a division somewhere, and this is the locking movement. It's not the tension in itself that is the problem. It is your developing wish to have looseness in an area where it should be tensed and loose at the same time. So you see here there is an already established contradiction in our attention, in our intention as well, what we want. And this is diffusing itself. So they're very putting on the table, saying this is what I want and this is what I want to get rid of. That is the thing that locks the system in too much tension and too little tension, depending on which area there is. Think about it. It doesn't really make sense that it can all of a sudden become tensed in the body. The reason for the tension is the wanting to get rid of the tension, and you create too much flaccidness, too much laxity, and that laxity makes it necessary for the body to tense itself, to keep itself upright in a fashion that it's not very helpful, it's not very constructive, and it starts the development of the T2 muscle, and in the end N2 neurons. And this is the start of a process that makes your body, your soul, your mind wanting to have even more laxity, relaxation, and thereby putting unnecessary, harmful flaccidity in those very positions where there should be attention, upright tension. So you are yourself the cause of this hierarchical formal system for the body, because it's no difference. To make a difference between body or mind or spirit or the world around us, it's the very thing causing the problem from the start. This is one of the reasons this imagery from John Appleton is, in this very case, extremely helpful, because by putting an image in front of your eyes and constantly trying to visualize it, you will strengthen your mind muscle first by being able to see it. And I think that is similar to training of memory you mentioned earlier. This strengthening of our visual capacity is also at the very same time strengthening of our capacity to move around, to move about. This is the genius explanation that Rudolf Gachet that made it click for me. It might not click for you, and he has at least 20 different models. One could click, two could click, could also be that none is clicking. I seriously doubt that none would click, but there is a possibility. Logically showing, or almost something that looks like a formal system, showing and forcing this exaggerated rationality to accept it should surrender at least some of its demands for absolute closure and absolute stillness and absolute Parmenidean assent. Instead, opening up, making it looser, more accepting, and all of a sudden, when you do your analysis, this has already happened for me, they become much healthier, fresher, livelier, more energized. And this is also, of course, the opening up of the impossible. Not hard to see that the formal system, well, old formal system could be different, but obviously the present formal system makes it impossible with miracles. It makes the impossible unperceivable. It is, in its very locking process, something that takes away the glory of the world. It takes away all the surprises. It makes everything completely predictable in formal system sense. It hinders you from, because of its very fixatedness, it hinders you from being observant, or it hinders you from being, hinders your access to reality. Reality is not constructed with contradictory oppositions. It's not a formal system. And I think here, the book is called Gödel Bach. Here the Bach section come in, because Bach is constantly playing on contradiction, because the whole music is contradictory. You have melodies that goes against each other, things that should not in reality be possible. And I compare those, like the Brandenburg Concerto, I compared those to contradictions going on at the very same time in our own system. And they make it possible to have playful, lively music, energy in the notes, in the upper notes, a melody that's vigorous, just because there are many melodies playing at the very same time. And I think it's telling that is a tendency that later in the development of music sort of disappears. More of the formal system come into play. And today most music is more or less a formal system. It doesn't allow for competing melodies. All the melodies should go in sync in a way. That is a sync that is mechanical, it's a spinning journey. It is more or less the denial of the fractal design of both vision, audio and sensitivity, which is fractal, and it's the construction of a music that is dimensionless. It doesn't have any dimensions to it. It's flatness. Of course, something that is a big pity. There's such a difference in music. It's less telling, it doesn't transfer the same amount of energy, the same amount of force, stamina, vigorous. Call it prana, call it kundalini. All these things seem to stiffen up, just like my neck has stiffened up a bit, and they make do for a system that is lacking in vigor. And here I don't share the point taken by Ian McGilchrist, that he thinks it's something that is inevitable, and it's constructed by the more or less fixated form that we was in before. But I don't think that holds. I think this was put in place already at the start, at the perceiving end, and the development that later came, that was in some circumstances inevitable. And it's very similar to once you started to tense, you're starting to want no tension. Once you're starting to feel down, you want to be happy once more. And that is the tendency that locks your needs to certain things. And you see how these clunkety things start to come into place, and they are beginning to enforce their really damaging and frictionful influence on the body, mind, spiritual system, taking away loads of those directedness you felt once when you did not force yourself to be constantly trying to uphold the formal system in all its might. Reality is in itself contradictory, and its contradictory nature is something that could be played out in many different ways. But it's a very healthy approach, Gulleshberg, because all of a sudden you are shown first from the beauty of mathematics when it comes to Gödel, the language of science, that the formal system of mathematics is not coherent and consistent. And then you go to the visual, the painting and drawings and etchings of Escher, and you realize that the glory of reality as it's perceived by us, it's not consistent, it's not coherent, and it ends with taking it in music as well, that contradictory tunes playing at the very same time makes it possible, makes room for more things, more glory, more depth. So one could see this as a celebration of life itself, because life in itself is driven by contradiction, and it makes for permanence, this wished permanence of Parmenides or Plato, that ideas should be permanent, they should be ever living. That is made possible by stop avoiding contradictions. Let them into your heart. They are not fearsome, they are in the very bottom of what gives energy. And I think this is a very good point to terminate this little go-through of Gödel Escher Bach, and I wish you a very pleasant afternoon. Bye bye.